The clink of my son's wine glass still echoed when his joke about me making it this far without breaking anything drew polite laughter. As his wife's smile tightened, I traced the rim of my own glass, steady, deliberate. While the air thickened with champagne and false warmth, I felt the old habit to stay quiet crack beneath my pulse. The same crystal that caught the light now caught my reflection. Calm, unshaken, finally free. That's when I realized his laughter sounded exactly like entitlement. I didn't break anything that night. I just broke the inheritance. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. Vivian's 70th birthday party felt like an event orchestrated under a microscope. Everything calculated and measured, from the balloons to the smile on her face. Elliot and Sadie had planned it all with a kind of mechanical precision. An elaborate show for the guests, for the family, for everyone but Vivian. There was nothing particularly wrong with the celebration, but there was an undercurrent of something unspoken, an invisible thread woven between the forced cheer and the awkward conversations. It was all too perfect. Too perfect in the way that masks everything beneath it. The dining room hummed with polite chatter, but the moment Elliot stood up, the noise seemed to fall away, like a record skipping on a scratch. He cleared his throat, his fingers drumming lightly on his wine glass, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. It was his turn to perform. "Can you believe she made it this far without breaking anything?" he quipped, the edge of sarcasm a little too sharp for comfort. Laughter rippled through the room, not genuine, but the kind that happens when everyone's been trained to laugh at the right moments. Vivian's lips curled into what could have been a smile, but her grip tightened around her wine glass. Her knuckles, once elegant and smooth, looked like brittle porcelain. She didn't speak, didn't laugh along, but her eyes, shining with something that wasn't entirely mirth, scanned the crowd. Sadie, sitting beside Elliot, offered a little nudge. "At least you're still sharp enough to remember our names, huh?" She leaned back in her chair, her posture too casual to be sincere. The words were a throwaway, one of those meaningless jabs that somehow still managed to cut. But it wasn't the words that unsettled Vivian. It was the way they lingered in the air, heavier than the stale wine that sat forgotten in her glass. A brittle laugh from one of the guests rippled through the room, but it wasn't enough to fill the empty space that was suddenly widening between them. Noah, sitting beside Sadie, didn't speak. He hadn't spoken much all evening. His eyes flickered uncomfortably from person to person, from the conversations happening around him, to the awkward pauses where no one knew what to say. He was the outsider, the silent observer. He caught Vivian's gaze for a brief moment, and she could see the unease there, a faint twitch of discomfort in his fingers as they drummed against the table. Marjorie, seated a few chairs down, leaned in toward Vivian, her voice soft, trying to bridge the gap. "You okay?" she asked quietly, as if speaking too loudly would cause the room to shatter. Vivian met her eyes for the first time all evening, a flicker of something darker behind the facade. "Yes," she said, her voice controlled, the words measured. "But I've seen enough." It was a phrase that carried more weight than she intended. Or maybe it was exactly what she intended. She stood up slowly, her knees protesting, but she wasn't in a hurry. The room fell silent as she made her way toward the sliding doors that opened to the garden. The noise of the party seemed to dull, muffled by the glass between her and the world inside. She felt the cool night air hit her skin, a welcome reprieve from the stifling warmth of the house. For a moment, Vivian just stood there, hands resting lightly on the wrought iron railing. She wasn't sure if she wanted to cry, scream, or simply disappear. A low hum of voices drifted from inside, but the isolation of the garden wrapped around her like a thick blanket, suffocating and comforting at the same time. Her thoughts kept circling back to the same question. When did it stop being her birthday and start being a production? When did her family, the people who were supposed to know her best, start using her life as a stage? It wasn't the jokes that hurt. It wasn't even the casual dismissals. It was the fact that no one saw her anymore. Not truly. Vivian had been a mother, a wife, a friend. And now, she was just an artifact of a time they couldn't even remember clearly. It felt like they were waiting for her to break, waiting for her to become a story they could tell. Like the punchline to a joke they'd all already rehearsed. The door creaked open behind her. She didn't turn around at first, but she knew who it was. Noah's hesitant footsteps reached her ears, his silhouette framed by the warm glow from inside. "Vivian," he said, voice soft, uncertain. Do you want me to get you something, or—" His words trailed off, unsure of how to fill the space between them. "No," she said, still not looking at him. "I just needed some air." He lingered for a moment, not sure whether to press further or to give her the silence she clearly wanted. His figure was a shadow behind her, and she felt the weight of his gaze, even if she couldn't see it. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, as if he were apologizing for something bigger than this moment. Vivian shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not your fault," but even as she said the words, she knew it wasn't true. It wasn't just Noah or Sadie or Elliot. It was all of them, every last one. They had all reduced her to a footnote in their own stories, and somewhere deep inside, Vivian wasn't sure if she could forgive them. Not tonight. She breathed in deeply, her chest tightening as the cool air settled around her. "I've seen enough," she repeated. But this time, she wasn't speaking just to Noah. She was speaking to herself. And in the echo of her words, there was a finality, a shift, something that could never be undone. Behind her, the door closed with a soft click, but it was already too late. The damage had been done. Vivian sat in the dimly lit corner of the garden room, a space that had once felt like a refuge. The sunlight filtered through the drapes, casting a soft glow over the stack of papers in front of her. She stared at the file, the last remnants of what was supposed to be her legacy. Her life distilled into a few cold, impersonal sentences. The will? It had always been there, a looming presence she never fully believed in. But today, it was impossible to ignore. Her fingers brushed the edges of the document, feeling the sharp, sterile edges of the paper as if they could cut through the years of unresolved tension. Elliot, Sadie, and even Noah, her children, her family, had shaped this. She had been the one who kept everything together, the one who hosted, who managed, who gave. Now, in this file, there were no signs of the woman she had once been, no mention of the care she'd given, the sacrifices she'd made. She read the words again, this time with the clarity that only distance could provide. Elliot gets the house. Elliot gets the savings. Elliot gets the workshop. Her breath caught in her throat. The house, the workshop, the savings. They were her life. The house had been where her children grew up, where laughter echoed in the halls. The savings were the quiet fruits of years spent making sure everyone else was taken care of, even when her own needs were sidelined. The workshop, a sacred space, had been her refuge, the one place where she could retreat and lose herself in creation. Yet now, all of it was about to slip through her fingers, handed over to Elliot, the son who had never once truly understood what it had cost her to hold everything together. Her fingers trembled as she set the document aside, her gaze moving to something more familiar, more personal, the photo albums. She pulled one from the shelf, her hands careful as she flipped through the pages. Year after year, birthday after birthday, there she was, always at the center, always the one organizing, hosting, and paying. And yet, as she looked at the photos, it became painfully clear no one ever really saw her. They smiled, sure, but those smiles didn't reach their eyes. They didn't see her as anything more than the one who kept the machine running. As her gaze drifted over the cards in front of her, faded birthday greetings, the signatures from Marjorie and Noah, Vivian felt a pang of sorrow. These cards were the only things that had ever felt like true recognition. Words from people who knew her, who saw her, who cared for her without expectation. Marjorie's steady friendship, Noah's quiet support. It was these small gestures that had kept her grounded, kept her from vanishing entirely beneath the weight of everyone else's needs. She tucked the cards back into the drawer, a bitter smile forming at the corner of her mouth. I kept tradition alive. They kept receipts. Her phone buzzed suddenly, breaking the silence. It was a message from Peter Lang, the lawyer who had been handling her estate. "Are you ready to begin again?" the message asked, simple, to the point. Vivian's thumb hovered over the screen, the weight of the decision pressing down on her chest. She had known this was coming, the need to break away, to make her own choices. And yet, now that the moment was here, she felt a quiet fear wash over her, not for herself, but for the future she was about to reshape. She typed, her fingers moving decisively, "Yes, I'm ready." For the first time in years, she felt like she was about to take control. This wasn't just a decision about money or property. It was about claiming back the space she had given away for so long. Her future, finally in her hands. Vivian sat in the cool, sterile office, the low hum of the fluorescent lights almost soothing as she stared at the stack of papers in front of her. Peter Lang, the lawyer, sat across the desk, waiting patiently. The moment had arrived. The finality of it hung in the air, as if the room itself held its breath, knowing that once this decision was made, there would be no turning back. Vivian ran her fingers over the cool surface of the papers, feeling their edges, their weight. This was it, the will, the one she had drafted with Peter's help, the one that would reshape her legacy. No longer would she be invisible in her own life. No longer would she simply fade into the background while others took what they wanted. Peter, ever the professional, glanced at her over the rim of his glasses, waiting. His voice was gentle but firm. "Vivian, are you sure? Once you sign, everything changes." Vivian met his eyes, her own gaze unwavering. "I've never been more sure," she replied, her voice steady. She had spent too long being a caretaker, too long being the backdrop to everyone else's lives. No more. Peter nodded, a small, knowing smile on his lips. He slid the documents toward her, the pen waiting. "Then let's begin." Her hand moved without hesitation, the weight of the pen in her fingers grounding her, reminding her of her purpose. She signed the first page, then the second. Each stroke of the pen was a quiet act of rebellion, a small declaration of independence. Elliot, her son, the one who had always viewed everything through a lens of ownership, would not inherit the house, the savings, or the workshop. Instead, the proceeds from the house would be redirected to a local youth arts foundation, 40%. It felt right. Her house, her sanctuary, would now be part of something greater, something that would give back, something that would mean something long after she was gone. The remaining 40% would go into a trust for Noah. He had been the one who truly saw her, the one who never demanded anything, the one who simply listened. He deserved this, and Vivian felt a swell of something warm in her chest as she thought of him, his quiet presence, his unspoken understanding. The last 20% would be earmarked for causes that had always mattered to her, the causes she had quietly supported over the years but had never openly discussed. It was time to live for her own convictions, to stop hiding them behind the masks she had worn for so long. Peter paused as she finished the final signature. He studied the paper in front of him, then looked up at her, his voice low. "Are you sure about the note for Noah?" Vivian felt a wave of emotion rise, but she held it steady. "For the boy who listened," she said softly, but with finality. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the recognition, the acknowledgement of what had always been true. Noah had been there for her in ways no one else had. He had seen the woman behind the roles she played, and that was worth more than any inheritance. Peter made the note, then slid the final document in front of her. She looked down at it for a moment, the weight of the decision settling over her. She signed it. As the ink dried, Peter leaned back in his chair. "It's done," he said, his voice calm, but there was something else in his eyes now, respect. "Everything's in place. The changes will be made. This is your legacy." Vivian let out a long breath, feeling lighter than she had in years. She stood up, the papers signed, notarized, and sealed. Her future was now her own, and for the first time in a long time, she was free. As she walked out of Peter's office, the sunlight outside felt different. It felt like her own. Vivian's fingers clenched around the letter, the paper stiff and cold beneath her grip. She had known the day would come when they would ask, demand. Really? But seeing it in print still sent a shiver down her spine. It was a shared lien application, a formal request from Elliot. "We seek your consent to place your property as collateral for a business loan. Terms of the agreement are set. Your property will be held until the loan is paid in full." She let the words wash over her, but they were no less suffocating the second time. Her house, the house she had built, the house she had lived and loved in for so many years, was being reduced to a mere asset, a commodity to secure Elliot's next step in his relentless pursuit of growth. Her pulse quickened as she reread the lines. "It's just numbers. You won't even feel it," she could almost hear him saying in that dismissive tone. How casually he spoke about her home, her home. It was as if the history they had shared, the years of birthdays, anniversaries, the life they had lived together, meant nothing at all. Just collateral, just numbers. She gripped the paper tighter. "You'd put my house up?" The words slipped out before she could stop them, though she was already dreading the answer. Elliot was quiet for a moment, as though surprised by her reaction. Then he exhaled, as if explaining something simple. "It's just numbers, Mom. You won't even feel it. It's a formality. We need it to move forward, for the business." He spoke as though he were discussing a trivial matter, as though it were only a matter of figures, not the foundation of her entire life. Vivian sat there, unable to speak for a moment. It was the same tone, the same dismissal she had heard countless times over the years. "It's for the business. It's to help me grow. It's what's best." And all along, it was never about what was best for her. Never about the home, the years she had spent building a life, holding together the fragile threads of their family. It was always about him, about what Elliot could take, what he could claim. She stared at the wall in front of her, her eyes tracing the family photos, the moments frozen in time, the birthdays she had thrown, the dinners she had prepared, the life she had created. Every picture, a reminder of the past, now feeling like an echo, faint, distant, and slowly fading. She had poured her heart into those moments, and now they were just background noise in his ambitions. Vivian's phone buzzed, pulling her from the sinking pit of despair that had begun to swallow her. She picked it up absently. A message from Sadie. "It's not like you're using it the same way anymore." Sadie's words hit with all the grace of a slap. "It's not like you're using it the same way anymore." The words twisted in her gut. Sadie didn't see it. She didn't understand that it wasn't just about the house. It was about what it meant, what it had meant. Vivian's hand trembled as she stared at the screen, the words glaring back at her, cold and dismissive. She erased the thread. Every message, every word from Sadie was now gone. She deleted it all, the lies, the dismissals, the absence of care. The phone buzzed again, and this time it was from Marjorie. "Viv, they don't just want your history. They want your future too." Vivian froze. Marjorie's words hit her like a punch, a cold truth she hadn't fully accepted until now. They weren't just taking her past. They were taking her future. They were using her, her home, her life, as nothing more than a means to an end. Her chest tightened. It was too much. She wasn't going to let them take it all. Not anymore. She stood up, her body moving before her mind caught up, and headed toward the door. But as she reached for the handle, the sound of footsteps outside her door made her freeze. She wasn't ready for this. Not now. Not with everything at stake. The doorbell rang. Vivian stood in Peter Lang's office, the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights above somehow comforting. The finality of it had settled into her bones, and as she watched Peter adjust the papers before her, she felt a steady pulse of clarity. The weight of years had been unbearable, but now, with this action, she was unshackling herself from the roles she had played for so long. She wasn't just signing documents, she was taking control. Peter slid the final sheet across the desk, his expression composed. "Once you sign this, Vivian, the house title will be transferred into a living trust under your control. No one can place a lien, no one can claim it. It's yours, and only yours, legally protected." Vivian's hand hovered over the page. The gesture was small, but the action felt like the severing of ties that had bound her, weak and fraying for years. She had taken the steps before, when Elliot asked for money, when Sadie needed a loan, but never had she truly owned anything for herself. The house was hers now in a way that had never been true, a foundation that would never again be used as a pawn. Her signature felt heavier this time, but in a good way. She wasn't just filling out a form. She was drawing a line in the sand. The weight lifted from her shoulders as she handed the completed papers back to Peter. "It's done," he said, his voice professional, but with an undercurrent of recognition. The trust will be registered, and all claims to the property are blocked. Vivian nodded, feeling the smallest flicker of relief. She had built this house, and now she had built her protection. As she drove home, the sky was streaked with pink and purple, the dusk of a world that felt different, as though a shift had taken place, unnoticed by the outside world but loud in her chest. She parked in front of the house, her house, and stood for a moment on the driveway. She looked at it differently now. The brickwork, the familiar windows, the door she had passed through so many times, each thing felt like an ally, something that would never betray her. The lock on the front door was the first to change. The old brass key, worn smooth from years of turning, no longer fit. She replaced it with a new, sturdy one that no longer felt like a symbol of hospitality, but one of fortification. She wasn't just locking the doors. She was locking out everything that had taken from her. Inside, she walked through the rooms, feeling a quiet satisfaction in the changes. A new security system installed, wiring that buzzed with potential, lights that flickered on at the sound of footsteps. This wasn't just a house anymore. It was a sanctuary, a place that was hers, protected and untouchable. Elliot's next visit was not a surprise. He had arrived without warning, as usual, letting himself in as though it were his home. But this time, Vivian stood in the entryway, her arms crossed, watching him with a quiet but unyielding gaze. He looked around, his eyes narrowing at the security system on the wall. "Upgrading?" he asked, his voice laced with that same condescending tone. Vivian met his eyes, unflinching. "Fortifying," she replied, her voice steady. The word hung between them, heavy with the change she had made. Elliot shifted uncomfortably, his eyes lingering on the security system before flicking back to her. "Seems a bit much," he muttered, but there was no conviction in his voice. Sadie, following him with her usual air of casual detachment, raised an eyebrow. "Planning for intruders?" she asked with a laugh, her tone light, as if it were a joke. Vivian's gaze turned to her, cool and calculated. "Or pretenders," she answered, the words slipping from her lips like a quiet challenge. Sadie's laughter faltered. And for the first time in a long while, there was a brief, almost imperceptible pause. Vivian wasn't joking. This wasn't about protecting what was already hers. This was about ensuring that no one would ever again walk in and take without asking. As Sadie and Elliot exchanged a glance, Vivian realized something she hadn't allowed herself to admit before. They might never understand. They might never see the change she had made or the depth of the boundary she had drawn. But that no longer mattered. Vivian's steps echoed through the hallway as she turned to walk deeper into the house, the air around her thick with a new kind of silence. The world had shifted, but this time it was her choice. She was no longer a spectator in her own life. The door closed behind her. It was locked, and for the first time in a long time, she felt safe. The kitchen was warm, the scent of tea filling the space, grounding Vivian in the quiet of the moment. The kettle whistled softly as it came to a boil, and she moved with a calm precision, the familiar movements comforting in their repetition. She had made this tea countless times, the routine a small anchor in her changing world. The evening light filtered through the window, casting soft shadows on the worn wooden counters. Noah sat at the table, his eyes fixed on the kettle, the steam rising and curling in the air. He didn't speak much, but his presence had always been a quiet one, solid, steady. Vivian glanced over her shoulder at him as she poured the hot water into the teapot. His eyes were intent, focused, as though he was waiting for something, but not sure exactly what. "You looked sad," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. His voice was low, almost hesitant. "I wanted to say something, but—" Vivian paused, the teapot still in her hand. She turned to face him fully, the weight of his words sitting between them. There was no judgment in his eyes, no expectation, only an open, honest curiosity. She smiled, a slow, soft smile that didn't quite reach the weight of her heart. "You said plenty by staying beside me," she replied, her voice quieter than usual. It was true. Noah had always been the one to stay. He hadn't offered empty words, hadn't tried to make her feel better. He simply stayed, and that had always meant more to her than any words could. He shifted in his chair, his fingers tracing the edge of the table, unsure of what to do with the quiet between them. Vivian set the teapot down and walked over to the counter, pulling down a small jar of sugar, a tin of cookies. The motion felt comforting, familiar. She wanted to fill the silence, not with empty words, but with something tangible. "Do you want some lemon bars?" she asked, her voice steady again, but with a touch of warmth. She had made them for years, a tradition that had never felt like a tradition until now. Noah's eyes lit up, and for a moment he looked younger, like the boy who had once sat at her kitchen table with a pencil in hand, watching her work. He nodded quickly. "Yes, please." Vivian smiled as she moved to the counter, preparing the ingredients. "I'll teach you how to make them," she said, the words more for herself than for him. She had never taught anyone her recipe, had always kept it to herself like a secret. But now with Noah, it felt right. It felt like something to pass on, something to leave behind. She measured out the flour, the sugar, the zest of lemon, explaining each step slowly, making sure he took it all in. Noah watched her intently, his sketchbook open on the table next to him, a few of his drawings scattered across the pages. As she handed him the whisk, he looked up at her, his eyes filled with something deeper than curiosity. "Can I show you something?" he asked, his voice shy but insistent. Vivian paused, the whisk in her hand. "Of course," she said, walking over to where he sat. Noah opened the sketchbook, turning the pages carefully. He pointed to a drawing, a simple one, but so full of feeling. It was a picture of her at the birthday party, standing alone near the window, a distant look in her eyes. Vivian's breath caught as she looked at it, the drawing capturing something she hadn't been able to put into words herself. The loneliness, the quiet of that moment. It was all there, laid out in the strokes of his pencil. "You really see things, don't you?" she asked softly, her voice thick with emotion. Noah met her gaze, his expression serious, his eyes searching hers for an answer. "I see you," he said simply. Vivian's heart clenched at the raw sincerity in his voice. He had always known, had always seen her in a way that no one else had. In that moment, she realized something. He hadn't just been a child sitting beside her, quietly watching. He had been seeing her, understanding her in a way that no one else had, not even herself. She smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek before she could stop it. It wasn't sadness, it was something deeper, something connected. Noah had heard her, truly heard her, even when she had stopped speaking. The kettle began to whistle again, but it was no longer just the sound of boiling water. It was a sign of something brewing, something changing between them. As Vivian reached for the teacups, she realized the true weight of the gift Noah had given her, the gift of being seen, and in that quiet, shared moment, everything shifted. She wasn't alone anymore. Noah was sitting at the kitchen table when Elliot walked in, his footsteps heavy with a purpose that cut through the quiet of the house. The tension in the air was palpable, as if a storm had been brewing for days, and it was about to break. Noah, absorbed in his sketchbook, didn't look up. He knew what was coming, he had known for days. But he wasn't going to back down. Not this time. Elliot stood in the doorway for a moment, surveying the scene, before he spoke, his voice tight with frustration. "Are you trying to make her feel guilty?" His words were sharp, as if they had been waiting to be unleashed. Noah didn't flinch. He kept his eyes on the page, his pencil moving slowly across it, as if he were deciding whether or not to engage in the fight. Finally, he looked up, his expression calm but unyielding. "I'm not trying to make anyone feel anything," he said softly, his voice steady. "I'm just drawing what I see." Elliot's jaw clenched. "Don't think I don't know what you're doing," he continued, his voice low and controlled, but there was an edge to it. "You've been filling her head with things she doesn't need to hear. You've been feeding into her guilt, making her believe she's been wronged." He took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. "She's not your responsibility, Noah." Noah didn't respond. He didn't need to. The silence between them spoke volumes. He wasn't going to apologize for seeing his grandmother for who she truly was, the woman who had always been there, quietly giving, quietly suffering, the woman who finally was beginning to find herself again. Just then, Sadie walked in, her presence immediately altering the air in the room. She glanced at Noah's sketchbook, her eyes narrowing as she noticed the drawing Noah had done of Vivian at the party. It wasn't just a drawing, it was a statement. A woman standing alone, near the window, caught in a moment of quiet isolation. "That's it then," Sadie muttered under her breath, but loud enough for both Noah and Elliot to hear. "We need to limit how much time he spends with her. He's just reinforcing all the wrong ideas." Elliot's gaze flicked from the drawing to Noah, his frustration now mingling with something darker, something that felt like ownership, a claim that didn't belong to him but was being asserted all the same. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, Vivian's voice broke through the tension, soft but firm. "Enough." Both Elliot and Sadie turned, surprised. Vivian had been standing in the doorway for some time, her gaze steady as she looked between her son, her daughter-in-law, and Noah. Her heart was heavy with the weight of their words, but she didn't let it show. She had heard enough, more than enough. The betrayal, the manipulation, it had gone on long enough. She had already given so much of herself, of her home, of her peace. But it was her life now, and it was time to take control. That night after dinner, when the house had settled into a stillness that was only disturbed by the occasional creak of the floorboards, Vivian sat at the desk again. The documents spread before her, the weight of her decision pressed on her chest, but there was something freeing in it too. This was her moment. She had already reclaimed her home, but now it was time to protect everything else. She picked up the pen, her fingers steady. She was updating the trust, one more crucial change that would protect her from further encroachment. She added a clause, one that would restrict Elliot and Sadie from any financial input or override. They had no more claim to her life, no more claim to her choices. Peter's voice came through the phone line moments later, his tone careful. "Vivian, you're sure? Once this is in place, it's legally binding. They won't be able to make any claims on the property or any financial decisions." "I'm sure," Vivian replied, her voice calm. "It's not just about protecting property, Peter. It's about protecting decency." Peter paused, and she could hear the weight of his approval in his silence before he spoke again. "You're doing what you need to do." Vivian signed the document with a quiet finality, the sound of the pen on paper almost soothing. She wasn't just securing her home anymore, she was protecting herself, her dignity, her peace, her voice. As she set the pen down, she felt something shift inside her, a quiet power settling into her bones. For the first time in years, she wasn't worried about what anyone else thought. The door to her future had swung wide open, and she was walking through it, unafraid. But as she rose from the desk, she heard the soft sound of footsteps approaching. And for the first time, Vivian wasn't sure if she was ready for what was coming next. The doorbell rang. 3 days passed, and still, Vivian did not pick up the phone. The silence was deafening, but it felt like a relief, a weight that had been lifted, allowing her to breathe. She didn't have to answer. She didn't have to explain herself. The world had shifted, and the space between her and the life she had once known felt vast, unbridgeable. Elliot had called each day, each message a little more insistent than the last. The first time, she let the voicemail beep, the words going unanswered. The second, she silenced the phone entirely, allowing the hours to pass without a single thought of picking it up. The third call came on the morning of the fourth day. She stared at the screen for a moment, her fingers hovering over the button, but in the end, she let it ring through to voicemail. "Vivian," Elliot's voice came through, calm but edged with something he could never quite conceal: control. "We need to align, okay? I know things have been tense, but this is about long-term structure. You've got to understand, the business, the family, it all depends on this. If we're not aligned on this, it could create some serious issues down the road. We can fix this, together. Call me when you're ready." His words floated in the air, their meaning like a dead weight. The tone, so casual, so confident, as if he still thought he had the right to demand this alignment, to control her life. It was always about what he wanted, never once about what she needed. The echo of those words lingered long after the voicemail ended, but Vivian remained silent. The phone sat on the counter, and she went about her day. The quiet was all-encompassing now, No one to interrupt her, no one to question her choices. The house, now secure under her trust, felt like an extension of herself, hers and no one else's. And for the first time in years, it felt like home again. That evening, Marjorie called, her voice a soft reassurance in the thick quiet of Vivian's world. "He's already spent the money he thinks is his," she said simply. The truth hung there, raw and unavoidable. Vivian wasn't surprised, but it still stung, that sense of entitlement from her own son, as if he believed everything in this house belonged to him. But it didn't, not anymore. The conversation was short, as it always was with Marjorie. No judgment, no lecture, just the quiet understanding of someone who knew exactly what Vivian was going through. She wasn't alone in this, not anymore. The next day, Vivian went to the mailbox. She slid a small check into an envelope and sealed it. It was the first disbursement from the Trust to the Youth Arts Foundation. It wasn't much, just a small seed. But it was a start, a statement. She wasn't just taking back control of her home, she was setting the stage for something bigger, something lasting. She was making sure that long after she was gone, there would be something good left behind. In the evening, Vivian walked down the street to the local cafe. The familiar buzz of conversation and the hum of the espresso machine greeted her as she stepped inside. The air smelled of roasted coffee beans and baked goods. And for the first time, the place didn't feel like a pit of noise and distraction. Tonight, it felt like a celebration of what she wasn't sure. But she could feel it in the air, like a thread pulling her forward. Noah was already there, setting up at the piano. His fingers brushed across the keys, the notes soft and uncertain. He had been quiet, distant even, but she could tell. He was nervous. It had been years since he had played in front of anyone, much less a crowd. But this was different. He wasn't playing for anyone else. He was playing for himself. Vivian settled into a seat at the back, watching as the small crowd trickled in, the sound of the piano filling the room. She could feel the shift in the atmosphere, how it grew calmer, more intimate. Noah played with a fluidity that surprised her, the music like a conversation, like a secret shared between him and the keys. It was beautiful, raw, and for a moment, Vivian felt like she had entered a space outside of everything that had ever held her back. And then, as if the universe was telling her it had all been worth it, the years of sacrifice, the choices that had felt impossible. Noah's eyes met hers across the room. His gaze was steady, but there was something else there, something that spoke louder than the music itself. He had found his voice, and in that moment, so had she. As the final note hung in the air, the room fell silent, and Vivian realized something. She wasn't just watching a performance, she was witnessing a beginning. Her grandson, the boy who had always seen her, was now stepping into his own. And for the first time, Vivian knew the future would be his, just as much as it would be hers. She stood and clapped, the sound sharp and true. The rest of the room followed, but she didn't care about that. She was clapping for him, for them, for what was finally possible. And as she walked to the front, Noah's smile broke through the quiet, and Vivian knew the hardest part was over, for both of them. The printer hummed as Vivian pressed the button, watching the words materialize on the page. A post from Sadie, shared on social media, had caught her eye, its tone dripping with subtle accusation. It wasn't the first time Sadie had taken to the digital stage to air her grievances, but this one was different. The words were sharper, more deliberate, a veiled threat masked in passive aggression. She had called her own actions protective, framing Vivian's decisions as an overreach, questioning her motives, and even insinuating that Vivian was no longer mentally capable of managing her own affairs. Vivian's fingers curled around the printed page as the ink dried. She handed it to Peter without a word. He looked at it, reading carefully, then glanced up at her, his expression unreadable. "We need to prepare a statement," he said quietly, his voice professional. But there was a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He had seen this before, people like Sadie, people who believed they could control the narrative when they didn't get what they wanted. Vivian didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked to the desk, her gaze steady as she pulled the trust documents back out of the drawer. She had known this moment would come. They would come for her decisions, for her freedom. She wasn't naive enough to believe that breaking away would go unchallenged. But she had planned for this. Peter began typing, but Vivian's mind was already 2 steps ahead. She picked up the pen, her movements slow but deliberate, as she wrote a codicil to her will. Her hand didn't shake this time. Not with doubt, not with fear. She wrote plainly, decisively, "Any party who contests this document shall forfeit their share." She looked at the words for a moment, the weight of them settling over her like a final breath before the storm. The decision was made. If they wanted to challenge her, if they wanted to try to take control of her life, they would lose everything. There would be no room for defiance here. Peter read the codicil over her shoulder, his eyes scanning the text. He didn't question it. He didn't need to. "You've thought of everything," he said. His voice a quiet acknowledgement of the power Vivian had claimed, of the meticulous care she had taken in protecting what was hers. Vivian met his gaze, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I taught for 30 years. I know how to plan for defiance." Her words were clipped, but they were true. She had spent years anticipating resistance, dealing with the subtle manipulations of students, of colleagues, of people who thought they knew better. She had learned over time how to plan for every contingency, how to build in safeguards. She wasn't just protecting property, she was protecting herself, and she had learned from the best. Peter nodded again, setting the documents aside. "I'll prepare the notarization," he said. "Once it's filed, there will be no question." Vivian glanced at the clock. It was late, the house quiet around her, but she wasn't tired. The weight of the decisions she had made didn't burden her anymore. She was lighter, freer. As she stood, she thought of Lily, her niece, the one person in the family who had always kept a distance from the chaos, the one person who saw the truth without judgment. Vivian smiled as she gathered a small package, carefully wrapped music books, hand-sewn bookmarks she had made herself, each one unique. A small gesture, but it felt like something real, something she could give freely. She sealed the package with a steady hand, her heart light as she wrote the note. She had never stopped caring, but now she had the space to show it. No longer would she be buried beneath the weight of what everyone else expected. She could give without fear of it being taken. Vivian tucked the package under her arm, a sense of peace settling in her chest. She hadn't been able to give much in the past, not without it being tainted by guilt or obligation. But now, the choices were hers to make. As she walked to the mailbox, her steps were sure. She wasn't walking away from anything. She was walking toward something new. The air was still, the streets empty except for her, and for the first time, Vivian felt as though the path ahead was truly hers, clear, untouchable, and waiting. When the doorbell rang again, she didn't hesitate. She was ready for whatever came next. Vivian sat quietly in the third row of the gala, her hands folded in her lap as the event unfolded in front of her. The bright lights, the murmurs of conversations, the clinking of champagne flutes, it all felt like a blur around her. It should have felt overwhelming, but instead, the calmness of the moment wrapped around her like a soft blanket. She wasn't there for the celebration. She was there for the recognition she had long been denied. As the evening progressed, her mind wandered to the past, the years of quietly making things happen, holding everything together for everyone else. Years of being the silent witness to others' successes, her own achievements never acknowledged in any meaningful way. Tonight, though, it was different. The scholarship in her name, the Clark Arts Fellowship, was something she could finally claim as her own. It was a validation of the life she had led, the sacrifices she had made, a quiet acknowledgement that she had mattered. The room dimmed as the announcer stepped up to the microphone. The hush that fell over the crowd felt like a signal, an invitation. Vivian could feel the weight of the moment pressing in. And now the voice rang out. "We are proud to announce the first recipient of the Clark Arts Fellowship, named in honor of the remarkable Vivian Clark. This year's award goes to a student who has demonstrated both talent and heart. Please join me in welcoming Noah Clark." Vivian's heart leapt. She hadn't known for sure, but deep down she had a feeling. She turned to see Noah stand, his expression a mixture of disbelief and awe. His usual quiet demeanor was now overtaken by a nervous excitement, as he walked toward the stage, the room erupting into applause. But it wasn't just the applause. It was the weight of everything that had led him here. Noah stood at the microphone, his voice a little shaky at first. He paused, taking a breath, his hand gripping the edge of the podium. I don't even know where to start, but I think you all should know that this means so much to me because of my grandmother. His voice cracked, and for a moment the room seemed to hold its breath. She's always been there for me. She's the reason I'm standing here. I'm so proud to be her grandson. Tears welled up in Vivian's eyes as Noah continued. He was speaking from the heart, and everything he said echoed the truth of their relationship, the quiet bond they shared, the unspoken understanding. She hadn't realized until that moment how much her actions, her quiet presence, had shaped him. Noah's voice caught again as he looked out at the audience. I can't thank you enough, Grandma. This is for you. Always for you. As he finished, the applause came louder, warmer this time. Vivian stood slowly, clapping for him. The tears in her eyes threatened to spill over, but she wiped them away quickly. This moment was his, and she didn't want to overshadow it. But when she turned back toward the stage, she noticed something, or rather, someone, was missing. Elliot, Sadie. They weren't there. Not a single member of her immediate family had shown up to witness this. They weren't interested in the recognition. They hadn't cared enough to be there. And for the first time, that realization didn't sting. It didn't matter. Her heart swelled. And for the first time in years, Vivian felt something else, something not tied to obligation or expectation. She felt seen, not because of the scholarship, but because Noah had finally seen her in a way that others hadn't. The applause finally died down, and as Noah returned to his seat beside her, she reached out and squeezed his hand. He turned to her, his eyes full of something she couldn't quite name, but the understanding between them was clear. Marjorie, seated beside her, leaned in and squeezed her hand with a knowing look. You did it right, she said softly. Vivian smiled, her chest tight with emotion. She had done it right. This wasn't about the people who didn't show up or the ones who hadn't understood. It was about the one person who had always understood her, the one person who had seen her, truly seen her. And in that moment, Vivian realized that this was all she had ever needed. The recognition wasn't for her age, nor her position, but for her influence. And it was enough. As the gala continued around her, Vivian stood with a quiet strength, her heart full, the quiet satisfaction of knowing that for once, she had been seen, not as a background figure, but as a force, as someone who mattered. Finally, she had found her place in a world that had always tried to push her aside. And with that, the door to her future, and to Noah's, was wide open. The gala was a sea of sparkling gowns and sharp tuxedos, an air of elegance hanging in the dimmed light of the ballroom. Vivian sat in the third row, tucked away behind a veil of faces she didn't recognize, the soft hum of conversation swirling around her. She had never been one for attention, preferring the quiet of the background, the unnoticed corner where she could observe without being seen. But tonight, that corner felt like a weight, a reminder that she had never been truly seen. Not until now. She wasn't sure what had brought her here, other than her name on the invitation and the quiet insistence from Marjorie. You've earned it, Vivian, she had said. The foundation wants to honor you. You need to be there. But now, as the lights softened and the podium came to life with the murmurs of anticipation, Vivian felt an unfamiliar tug in her chest. It wasn't discomfort exactly, but something more profound. An ache, maybe, or the stirring of a deep hunger for something she had never dared to want. To be seen, truly seen, as more than a caretaker, a wife, a mother. To be recognized for something that hadn't been for anyone else. The program began, a series of announcements and speeches that droned in the background while Vivian's thoughts swirled with the quiet chaos of her life. She didn't need the applause. She never had. But tonight, for reasons she couldn't quite explain, the idea of it, of recognition, felt like something she might actually accept. And then, the announcement came. We are honored tonight to introduce a new initiative, one that will carry on the legacy of a woman whose contributions to the arts have shaped generations of young artists. The Clark Arts Fellowship will be awarded annually to a student who embodies the same quiet strength, dedication, and love for the craft, as Vivian Clark has shown in her life. We are proud to announce that the first recipient of the Clark Arts Fellowship is none other than Noah Clark. Vivian's breath caught in her throat as she straightened, her eyes snapping to the stage. Noah, her grandson, stood there, his face a picture of disbelief and gratitude. A sudden flood of emotion rushed through her, pride, joy, a deep ache that she hadn't known she could feel. He looked so young, so earnest, as he walked to the podium. Noah took the microphone, his hands trembling slightly. The room fell silent, save for the soft rustling of paper as he gathered his thoughts. Then, with a quick glance toward her, he began to speak, his voice catching as he fought to keep it steady. "I don't know if I can truly express what this means," he started, his voice a mix of awe and emotion. "But I know I wouldn't be here without my grandmother. She taught me more than just how to play music. She taught me how to live with heart. She's always been there for me, even when I didn't realize how much I needed her." He paused, swallowing hard. "I owe everything to her. This scholarship, this honor, it's as much hers as it is mine." And then he did something that surprised her. He looked at the audience, tears brimming in his eyes, before he turned back to Vivian. "Thank you, Grandma. From the bottom of my heart, thank you." The applause came like a wave, loud and warm, but Vivian didn't hear it. All she could hear was the sound of Noah's voice, cracking with emotion, and she felt a single tear slip down her cheek. He had thanked her. He had finally seen her. Not as a shadow in the background, not as a mother or a grandmother, but as someone who had mattered in his life in ways she hadn't known until now. As Noah returned to his seat, Vivian realized something she hadn't allowed herself to admit. This was the recognition she had always wanted, the one that wasn't about performance or pretense. It wasn't about keeping the peace or making sure everyone else was okay. It was about being acknowledged for what she had given, for who she was. Her eyes flicked briefly to the side. There, in the far corner, was the empty space where Elliot and Sadie should have been sitting. They hadn't come, and Vivian knew, in that moment, they never would. A hand gently squeezed her own, breaking her from her thoughts. Marjorie's voice was soft, a quiet whisper of approval. "You did it right," she said, her words simple but laden with the weight of years of friendship, of shared understanding. Vivian nodded, her smile small but genuine. She had done it right. She had found her peace, her recognition, and the one person who truly understood her, Noah. This moment, this small victory, was all hers. But even as the gala continued, Vivian knew this was only the beginning. There was more to come. The world was waiting for her now, and she would meet it on her own terms. The quiet legacy she had built, bit by bit over the years, was finally being honored, and in the process, she had found something she hadn't expected: her own place in the world. The evening drifted on, but Vivian didn't feel the need to stay. She had already found everything she needed. She stood up slowly, her hands shaking slightly, but with the unmistakable feeling of pride flooding her chest. This moment, this night, was hers. And she was ready to walk away, knowing that, for once, she had been seen. Not for her age, but for her influence. And as she left the ballroom, the cool night air met her skin like a gentle caress, and she knew that no matter what came next, she had done it all. She had done it right. Vivian sat at her desk, the quiet of the room enveloping her like a cocoon. It was late afternoon, the sun's fading light casting a golden glow through the window. She had spent hours organizing her thoughts, sorting through old photographs, and deciding what to share. She'd never done anything like this before, not with the intention of giving it away anyway. But now, with the knowledge that it might be the most important thing she could leave behind, she felt calm. Noah was at the cafe, doing his usual thing, playing, learning, growing into the young man he was meant to be. She had watched him transform from the boy who had drawn those sketches to the young artist now standing on his own, carving out a space for himself in the world. And with each day, he seemed less like the shy, quiet child and more like the man he was destined to become. Vivian picked up the pen and began writing, This wasn't a letter for now, but for a time when Noah would be old enough to understand everything she had never said aloud. When he turned 21, she wanted him to know more than just the surface stories of their lives. She wanted him to have the truth of her thoughts, the memories that had stayed locked away, and the lessons that had taken a lifetime to learn. Her handwriting was neat and purposeful, the words flowing easily from her heart. My dear Noah, I write this letter for the day when you turn 21, though you may never need it. I want you to have it. Life isn't always straightforward, and sometimes you'll find yourself searching for things that seem impossible to understand. But what I want you to know most of all is that you are not alone in this. When you were young, you watched me, and I'm grateful for that. You saw me when I couldn't see myself, when I was too caught up in making sure everything worked, in making sure you were okay. But I want you to know that all of it, everything I did, everything I gave, it was because of my love for you. I've included some of the recipes we used to make together and the stories we shared. I hope they remind you of the moments that matter, the small, quiet ones, because it's in those that life becomes beautiful. I'm proud of you, Noah. More than you know, don't ever forget that. Vivian paused, her fingers trembling slightly. She had always been better at giving than receiving, better at showing than telling. But now, with this letter, she was giving him something she had never given anyone before. Everything. Her hopes, her love, her memories. The pieces of herself that no one else had ever seen. She placed the letter in an envelope, sealed it carefully, and tucked it in the drawer beside her. This was hers to give when the time was right, when Noah was ready to understand the full scope of her life, their life. Later that evening, as Vivian settled into her favorite chair by the fire, the quiet of the house felt comforting, familiar. The letter was now safely stored, but Noah's absence left a subtle ache in her chest. She had been waiting for this. The moment when she would give him everything she had held back, the moment when he would understand. But when the knock came at the door, it wasn't Noah. It was something altogether different. Vivian's phone buzzed. She picked it up, surprised to see Elliot's name on the screen. Her finger hovered over the call button for a moment, but instead, she let it go to voicemail. The message pinged almost immediately. Just checking in. Hope you're not mad. We need to talk, Viv. Call me. Vivian stared at the screen, her finger hovering over the delete button. She could almost hear the tone in his voice, the same one that always tried to mask his control, the one that assumed she would always cave, always bend. But not anymore. With a slow, deliberate motion, she hit the delete button. The message disappeared from the screen as though it had never existed, and with it, the last remnants of the past she had outgrown. Vivian turned her gaze to the fire, the flames crackling in the hearth. She felt lighter now, unburdened by the ghosts that had followed her for so long. The future was unwritten, but it was hers to create. She smiled to herself as she thought about Noah, the letter tucked away, waiting for its time. She had done everything she needed to, everything she could. And now, as the night settled in around her, Vivian felt the fullness of a life lived for herself and for him. She was ready for whatever came next. Vivian stood in her kitchen, the faint warmth of the fire casting shadows on the walls, as the kettle began to whistle. She moved slowly, deliberately, each motion calming her as if the act of making cocoa could smooth out the edges of the life she'd spent years piecing together. Tonight was different. Tonight she wasn't rushing. There were no demands, no expectations. The quiet was enough. She poured the hot water into her mug, the steam rising like the soft whisper of something new. For so long she had lived in the background, the silent supporter of others' needs. But this moment felt like hers. She hadn't asked for recognition, but she was finally allowing herself to enjoy it. She picked up the mug, letting the warmth seep into her fingers, savoring the simplicity. The house was still, save for the soft creak of the floorboards beneath her feet, and the hum of Noah's piano music in the next room. He had been playing again today, gentle, fluid notes that filled the space with something soft, something hopeful. As his music floated through the house, Vivian felt herself relax into the rhythm of it. The house, once filled with the noise of others' demands, was now alive with their own quiet space. Sitting at her desk, Vivian looked at the journal she had pulled from the drawer. She hadn't written in it for months, but today felt different. She opened it and picked up her pen, slowly, deliberately. I stopped making room for people who leave me standing. The words felt like a release, a simple statement, but it held everything she had been carrying for so long. She had spent years giving, bending to everyone's needs, never once making space for herself. But now she had drawn a line. She wasn't going to bend anymore. Vivian closed the journal, her hands steady. She wasn't just writing her life down, she was reclaiming it. She wasn't just standing in the background anymore. She was standing in her own light. There was a soft knock at the door. She walked toward it, her heart light. When she opened it, Marjorie stood there, holding a small bag. Vivian smiled as she stepped aside to let her in. "I thought you might like this," Marjorie said, handing her the bag. Vivian opened it, revealing a beautifully bound book of poetry, Marjorie's favorites. She ran her fingers over the cover, feeling the weight of it in her hands. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. Marjorie's smile was gentle. "You deserve it." Noah's music floated down the hall, a soft backdrop to their quiet conversation. Marjorie took a seat beside her, and they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the melody. As Noah played, Vivian realized that, for the first time in years, she was truly here, not in the background, not in the shadow of others. She was present. Her life, her choices, her voice, all finally her own. Vivian laughed, a light, easy sound that came from deep within her. It was the first time in weeks, maybe longer, that it felt like she could breathe freely. There was no weight in her chest anymore, no burden she hadn't chosen for herself. She leaned over to Marjorie, smiling through the quiet joy that filled the room. "You did it right," she said softly, the words of gratitude hanging in the air between them. The late afternoon sun filtered through the curtains, casting soft light across Vivian's desk as she sat with the stack of documents in front of her. The papers, her legacy, her final word on everything, were spread out in front of her, each line telling a story. The weight of them was different now, not heavy with guilt or obligation, but steady with resolve. Vivian ran her fingers over the pages, her mind clear and unclouded. The decisions she had made, the steps she had taken, were all recorded here. Each clause was a chapter of her life, the scholarships, the donations, the trust. It all made sense now. She had never imagined that it would come to this, but it had. And now it was hers to shape. She thought of all that she had given over the years, sacrifices, quiet gestures, and endless work to support those around her. She had always been the one who bent, the one who gave. But these pages spoke differently now. They spoke of a woman who had stopped giving herself away, a woman who had finally learned how to protect what was hers. Vivian paused and glanced at the photos on the desk, snapshots of her past. She lifted a frame, her fingers brushing the glass. It was an old photo of her and Frank, smiling together on a rare afternoon where the world had felt still. She had kept so many memories, so many pieces of the past, family photos, old letters, mementos. But tonight she knew it was time to let go. There were some things she could no longer hold on to. The photo of Noah was the next she picked up. His face, young and full of promise, had always been a reminder of what she had built, what she had worked for. That one she would keep. The rest, she decided, would be boxed and donated. It was time to let others carry the weight of the past for her. She no longer needed the clutter of old memories to define who she was. She had built something new, something solid. She walked to the closet, where a box of family photos sat untouched for years. The box was heavy, but not with regret, just years of forgotten moments. She began sorting through them, feeling the weight of each one as she made her choices. Only a handful of pictures were saved. The rest folded away into the box for someone else to claim. Her hands moved quickly, methodically. Once she might have clung to every scrap of memory. Now she let them go. After everything had been cleared away, Vivian returned to her desk. She took a deep breath and added the final clause to the will, her pen moving steadily across the paper. It felt like a necessary step, one that sealed her choices in stone. In the event of any challenge, all assets shall divert to charity. Peter Lang would arrive shortly to finalize everything, but the sense of finality was already settling over her. She had never expected to be in control of her own legacy, but now she was, and it felt right. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Peter's voice filtered in, soft but with the weight of authority. "Vivian, ready?" She looked at the documents one last time. Her legacy, her decisions, her strength. It was all here, in front of her, in black and white. She stood and walked to the door, her back straight, her heart steady. Peter was standing in the hallway, holding a briefcase. As he entered, he glanced at the papers on her desk. His eyes softened just slightly, as if recognizing the quiet power of the woman who had just signed her name to history. "This is legacy done right," he said, his voice respectful, acknowledging the weight of the moment. Vivian smiled, her expression firm. "It's the only way I know how." The door closed behind them, but Vivian's heart remained open, ready for the future. She had done it. She had created the life she deserved. And now it was truly hers. No one could take that from her. No one could rewrite it. And as she walked away from the desk, she realized that for the first time in her life, she was finally free. Vivian woke to the soft sound of piano music, drifting through the house like a gentle breeze. She lingered in bed, listening to the notes as they played on, familiar and comforting, like an old friend speaking quietly in the morning. Noah's music. She smiled, her heart swelling with quiet pride. It was her 71st birthday, though she hadn't thought much of it. The day had arrived like all others, with no grand expectations, but the morning felt different somehow, lighter, freer, like something new was unfolding just out of reach. She sat up, stretching slowly as the light from the window filtered through the curtains, casting soft shadows across the room. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt like a deep breath, a pause. Noah's playing continued, soft and steady. He had been practicing more these days, and the music had become a backdrop to their lives, a steady companion. Vivian stood and walked toward the kitchen, where the warm scent of breakfast greeted her. Eggs, toast, and of course, lemon bars, her favorite. The table was simple, but there was love in the way Noah had arranged everything, in the way he had made this morning hers. She sat down and Noah smiled across the table, his eyes full of something warm and tender. "Happy birthday, Grandma," he said, his voice steady, as though he was offering her the world with a few quiet words. They ate together, the sound of their conversation quiet but easy. The world outside faded for a moment as they shared this small, intimate piece of their day. Then, after a few moments, Noah reached across the table and handed her something small, wrapped in a simple envelope. It was a card, carefully made, with childlike but genuine handwriting. She opened it slowly, her heart catching in her throat when she read the words inside. "Thank you for showing me how to listen." The words hung in the air, simple but profound. Noah had always been the quiet one, watching from the sidelines, but now, in this moment, he had truly seen her, and she had seen him. She blinked back tears, swallowing the lump in her throat. She hadn't expected this. He had learned, quietly, over the years. And now, he was giving something back. Vivian smiled softly, her hands trembling slightly as she placed the card on the table. "Thank you, Noah," she whispered. "I'm proud of you." After breakfast, she sat at her desk, the journal open before her. She picked up the pen and wrote her final entry, a small, quiet release of everything she had been holding on to. "I broke the pattern, and in doing so, I found peace." The words settled in her chest, a quiet sense of finality washing over her. She had done it. The life she had always quietly lived had been a pattern she had outgrown. In breaking it, she had finally found freedom. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Marjorie stood there, holding a small bouquet of tulips and a pot of tea. "One more candle this year," she said with a smile, as though it were a simple, natural thing to celebrate. Vivian took the tea and smiled back, feeling the warmth of the moment. She sat down with Marjorie, the two of them quietly sharing the tea, their conversation soft and steady. And when the moment came, Vivian blew out the candle with a soft, final breath. The flame flickered and went out, but the peace remained. At my 70th birthday, my son joked that I'd made it this far without breaking anything. I smiled because he didn't know I was about to break tradition by leaving everything to someone who actually cared. Vivian leaned back, her heart light, as the future opened up before her.